Well, hello, John. This is John. How are you, John?
Pretty good.
Okay.
Lately, you seem to be getting into different kinds of musical influences on your album. We're talking now about your most recent album.
Walls and Bridges, folks.
Walls and Bridges. And I was wondering, why you got into different things on the album. You always seem to be kind of pure as far as influences, what was going on at the time. And in this album, I hear some jazz, I hear some kind of funky soul influences. What kind of got you into that?
Well, you see, it's only noticeable objectively, you know. I didn't sort of sit down and think I'm going to do a different sound on this album or anything. And I just pulled in the usual musicians with a few added extras, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened when we played together.
You mean you didn't go in with a set thing like...
No, I usually have an idea of what the song sounds like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't go in and think, oh, this is jazzy or this is funky R&B or nothing, you know?
Yeah.
And I just play it by ear, so there was no set plan, and until you said it, I hadn't really thought that it sounded any different. I think I'm just getting better at it, you know?
Uh-huh.
But I didn't consciously think the music was, the influence was any different.
Is a lot of that due to whoever you happen to be playing with at the time?
I think that they do tend to obviously influence a record, you know, but I'm using the people I've used many times before. That's like Jim Keltner and Klaus Voormann and people like that.
Yeah.
I think maybe the horns gave it maybe a touch of jazz, you know?
Yeah, and there seemed to be some kind of funky guitar things in there that were, almost soul at times.
Oh,
which
well,
I hadn't experienced in your music before.
Well, it's probably I hadn't used a guitarist like that before. I used Jesse Ed Davis on this one.
Yeah.
I'd used him on the Harry Nilsson album that I'd produced for Harry. And we'd known each other off and on for years, and I just liked the way he plays, you know. I didn't ever think what style it was.
Yeah.
You know, he just plays sort of sweet guitar, and that's what I like.
I read the other day that you've accepted the fact that you are an ex-Beatle, a fact that for a while you were kind of hostile to the idea.
I think it was a case of divorce pangs, you know?
Yeah.
And now I'm collecting Beatle memorabilia from the Beatle Fest, you know? I mean, that's how it's changed, right?
What kind of changes did you go through to get to that point? When you put out your solo album, you seem to be...
Well, I was like shaking the dust off me, you know?
And then once you got past that point, you can look back at it more objectively now?
Yeah, now I look back at it, you know, with fond memories, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And when we see each other, we're not talking business, you know? We've been seeing a lot of each other this year.
Mm-hmm.
And we've stopped talking business. We seem to have settled the business, and everybody just talks about, you know, didn't we have fun in Hamburg, or remember that day on tour, that kind of stuff. So it's all, like, easy going now.
On your first solo album, you seem to feel very strongly about a lot of things, about the predicament of the world and your predicament, and I thought it was a very emotional album for me to listen to.
Yeah, it was.
And I'm sure for you to record.
Oh, yeah.
How has your art changed since then? Everything seems to be a little lighter now. Is it the same thing? You're a little farther away from those things? And
it's a bit like that. I mean, the first solo album was done just as the Beatles were splitting, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Also, I was in the middle of therapy,
mm-hmm.
and I was really doing a sort of inward trip, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of sort of weird things in there, in all of us, right?
I think...
Or surprising things, more like it.
I think that album was, to me anyway, that was a masterpiece.
Oh, thank you. That is my favorite sort of piece of work, you know? It's not the kind of thing I sit down and play, you know, for fun.
No, you don't sit down on a sunny day and listen to it to try to get off.
Right.
But I think it captures a lot of things that you were leading to throughout your career with the Beatles that you had kind of attacked in a light manner. I think it all culminated in that album, and to me, that album, I think, is probably one of the 10 best albums I've ever heard, as far as an artistic statement by an artist, you know.
Oh, thanks, John. That's very nice. I think that's a good observation. I think I stopped going to the point of whatever I was getting to in a roundabout way on that album. I just got right down to the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, the production and everything was really key. It gave you the impression that you were in a room with John Lennon, and he was pouring his heart out to you. The production was minimal as far as overdubs and instruments.
I didn't overdub anything.
Yeah, it was a very close album.
There was only 3 musicians on it. You know, there was only 3 people on every track.
Yeah.
And I think it would have it just didn't. Nothing else was called for.
Right.
It wouldn't have worked if I'd put a nice little oboe solo in Mother, you know.
Yeah.
It just wasn't called for. But obviously, I can't be going through such a deep emotional trip all the time, you know. Otherwise, I'd be either a psychiatrist or a shredded wreck.
That was.
I obviously, like anybody else, I go through these things and then I sort of quotes, pull myself together, unquotes, which is, not really true. So it could be pulling yourself untogether. But then I have to actually forget about mommy now and then and deal with the world, and then I deal with it like anybody else. So the reason this album probably sounds lighter is because that's just the way I was feeling at this period, you know.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel most in touch with yourself when you were doing, for instance, that first solo album? I kind of have the feeling that at that time you were really aware of what John Lennon was and is, and at other times you kind of fall into the everyday rut that we all fall into sometimes and don't think about that as much.
Yeah, that's true. I call it being awake or being asleep, you know.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, I think I'm awake at this period, but I'm not but still not awake to go and just put a bleeding heart out or a pimple, you know.
Yeah.
Because I have to survive myself, you know. So, but I think, in those terms, awake or asleep, I've been asleep about 2 years, you know.
Do you feel that artists, we're talking art now instead of pop music, do you feel that artists work best when they have a lot of stress and strain placed? Do you think that that's when they turn out their most creative works?
I think, unfortunately or otherwise, you do get into a creative rut if everything is going rather smoothly, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think artists somehow have a built-in thing which is slightly self-destructive, which means if it does get cozy, suddenly the instinct is to rip all your clothes off, and create some kind of sensation that you can feel,
Something that brings you back in touch with yourself.
Yeah, and sometimes it's costly, sort of emotionally or physically or anything.
Yeah, the jolt is too much.
That's the only way you can get down to the nitty-gritty,
Right. You seem to attack McCartney now in your first couple solo albums. How do you feel about Paul McCartney now?
It's like a joke. We're just good friends. we're pretty close now. Like I was telling you before, whenever he comes to America, he comes with Linda to see me, and we go eat and we reminisce about old times. And we really both have evolved out of whatever feelings we had when we first split. I think it's a case of we were more scared than we thought. All of us. The fact. However the split happened, being suddenly on your own after 10 years was a pretty scary thing for all of us.
I think you probably turned out the most creative things.
Well, that's nice of you, but I guess it's a matter of opinion.
Well, my point is not to give you a stroke.
Yeah, well, I'll take it.
My point is, do you think McCartney, just from your personal vantage point of what his potential is, and you probably know him better than most people, do you think that he has come along since his first solo album, which I personally was kind of disappointed with?
I think he has. If it hasn't actually happened, he's in the process of freeing himself somehow or other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it does show in the music, in as much as it's on one level it gets to you right away. I don't mean in a MOR way,
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely something musical happening in his stuff, which I didn't think was happening in the early stuff. Although the music was there, it was just like he had it in an overcoat,
Yeah.
And I think it seems like he's taking his overcoat off now.
Yeah, it didn't seem to grab you, and his stuff, it seems like he's headed in a direction that at least he's conscious of now. He's not...
Yeah, I think it's very awake music, whatever it is, and I started listening to it again, and I must say I dig a lot of it,
Now, you at one time said that George's album was very nice, but you wouldn't listen to it in your home. Now, I get, again, the feeling... just from listening to your last couple albums, that you are aware of a lot more kinds of music than you used to be. Is that correct or incorrect?
It's probably correct, but it's unconscious, I mean, I listen to the radio, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whatever's going down, that's what I'm hearing.
I like that plug for radio, by the way.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure.
I'll give you...
John Lennon on WZMF, Milwaukee. How are you?
WZMF.
Oh, okay. This is John Lennon on WZMF, Milwaukee. What's cooking? You know, I dig radio because it's still, you know, the freest thing besides underground cable TV, which is still a bit limited, you know?
Yeah.
But I dig radio, and that's where I get all my musical information from. I'm not the kind that can sit down and listen to albums, you know, unless I'm at somebody's place and they say, here, listen to this, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So unless I turn the radio on, I wouldn't know what was happening.
Do you take yourself as seriously? Now, this is kind of your awake, asleep thing again, possibly. At one time, you took yourself very seriously as an artist. You compared yourself to Van Gogh, and you took art, the art part of the music business, or whatever you want to call it, very, very seriously.
Yeah.
Do you fluctuate between thinking about that side of it as opposed to the commercial side of it, or are you pretty much always on one side or the other?
No, I do fluctuate, and I don't. The comparison bit, what I was trying to say was that if you really sit down and think about what you're doing as an artist, you're up against some real heavy guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or women, just to get that one clear. And it wasn't really comparing myself with Van Gogh, but it's comparing yourself with everything that's gone down in the universe. You know?
Right, that you feel a kind of empathy with other people who have tried to say something. And
yeah, I definitely do. And Van Gogh, for instance, was something that the auntie that brought me up, you know, always was talking about. You know, she always talked about Van Gogh and Oscar Wilde, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I refer to an artist, I tend to refer to those people that were sort of, you know, in my consciousness as a child. And, you know, it's really like that. But one of the things I always said was I didn't want to be a Dylan Thomas or you know, not that I really think I'm a Dylan Thomas, but there's two guys, the Irish one, well, I can't remember his name offhand now.
I'm Irish and I can't remember his name.
Let me think. Brendan Behan.
Yeah.
And Dylan Thomas. Well, they drunk themselves to death, you know, to sort of please everybody, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And the instinct I've always had, although I always empathize with artists and the purity of them, is that I'm not going to kill myself for it, you know. I don't care what the game is, I'm just not going to do that for my art, so I don't take it that seriously, but I tend to get into that now and then.
Lately you've been, according to the press, kind of freaking out.
Well, that was last year. You know what, usually the press
is a little behind
time. Frank Sinatra would say, is usually about 6 months late with what's going on, right?
Was that a reaction to anything in your personal life?
It was personal, and the immigration, which is all personal, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It just got down to, you know, hanging around with the boys and getting drunk. But because I'm famous, it gets in the paper, you know.
No.
And it was just like working it out that way, but it doesn't really work that way because you wake up after your hangover and you've got to face it anyway. So
I got a feeling when I saw you and Yoko on Disc Cavett, I think it was about 2 years ago, that you were basically playing the John Lennon game on Cavett's show. That you didn't... I expected, this was just after your first solo album, I expected you to reflect some of the things that you were saying in your album, and I got a very slick, Beatle-type, witty, Hard Days Night John Lennon out of the whole... Was that some kind of a defense against his questions you were asking, which were possibly you didn't, you know, really want to answer, or what? Or was that a mistake? Maybe I interpreted it wrong.
You're probably right there. You know, A, offhand I can't remember because I was on the show a few times. B, but I can guess what I was up to, which was presenting myself as quotes normal, unquotes normal as I could, because I have this immigration problem which I've had since I got here.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, depending on what he was asking, I would give, you know, I'm not going to go on about my mother or God and the universe if he's asking me, you know, something that's nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
I don't have that thing, you know. Some people, well, Yoko, for instance, if you ask her a question about how's the dog, she'll give you an answer about Buddha, you know, because that's what she wants to say.
Mm-hmm.
And I respect it, but I can't do it. And I find myself turning into a Hard Days Lennon, right?
Yeah.
When I'm put on the screen, you know?
Yeah.
In front of an audience, and I know that my immigration lawyer's watching, and he's thinking, you know, present yourself well, son, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I tend to fall into that pattern. It's like second nature now, because it's been going on so long,
I was just wondering, because I think everybody does that. I think if I'm put in a situation where I meet new people, I fall into a certain pattern that has worked me through these situations before.
Right.
And I really don't. It's not the awake side of me, as you say, that will come out. You're not in that position at that time.
That's what it is. You just sort of fall into your old game, really.
It's almost unconscious. I would imagine when you get off a show like that you almost can't remember what you said.
Oh, right. Nothing at all,
It's like another automatic person took over.
Right, and you wondered, was he smiling?
Yeah.
Things like that.
Why did you and Alan Klein part company?
Well, why does anybody part company, I guess, I like him as a person. Everybody thinks, oh, well, there must be something terrible going down between them. And there isn't really. It's just that he's too much of whatever he is,
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really need that kind of protection, as it were.
Do you ever resent your kind of gung-ho attitude? A lot of times the feeling I get is that if you latch onto something that you think will work for you, that you plunge into it head and foot, support it, talk about it, sing about it, and then you have withdrawal from it, do you feel sorry then that you got into it, or is that just your way and you accept that?
I don't, because I've had to adjust to being like that, because that's part of my personality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a bit to do with the artist side, like you said, If something's going on and it's around me, I sort of like a chameleon,
Mm-hmm.
And I just really get into it, If it's cornflakes or even with my food, If I get into a food, I eat only that food for weeks until I'm sick to death of it,
Do you find that you learn better about any one specific subject that way, by getting into it as much as you can?
Well, that's the only way I know, It's like at school they always used to say, he's intelligent, but he only does what he wants to do. Which was supposed to be a bad point. Or he's only interested in things that interest him. That was the kind of dialogue they give you. And if I'm interested in something, I have to really get inside it,
And find out what it's all
I don't
about.
care if it turns out to be not the answer to the universe when I've been through it.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's that side of you which is always like a journalist, That sort of objective self that's watching all the time, even if you're in the Himalayas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like the artist side of it is recording what's going on all the time. And it's a bit like we were saying before, it's like you put yourself in a situation to experience something that you'll have something to say about.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're just going to be saying, the sun came up, the sun went down, I'm in love, I'm out of love,
How do you feel about the constant rumors, John, that the Beatles will be getting back together? Those crop up probably every couple months. Does that irritate you?
A couple of years back it might have done, but now, it doesn't at all, And sometimes I think, oh, are they? I mean, it's a weird feeling.
I think the Beatles and all of the Beatles individually represented something in a lot of people's lives that has never really been replaced since then, possibly a crutch, which is probably why people would love for the Beatles to get back together again. In your first solo album, now you were pretty much down on crutches and props to help people make it through with anything outside of themselves.
Yeah.
On the latest album, we have
Whatever
Gets You Through the Night, which to me implies that you are acknowledging that people need it, and possibly you need something, anything, and that you're saying that it's all right. Have your views changed, or are you just maybe saying it a little differently and I'm missing it?
No, I don't think you're missing anything. I think it's just, it's what one does is express what one is feeling at a given moment even, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you write it down in a song, like that song was not sort of, I didn't sit down and work on it, it was sort of, it just came, right?
Mm-hmm.
It just came out the blue, as it were, and there it said what it said. And I look at it almost like you do and say, well, what is he saying now, right?
Yeah.
And he seemed to be saying, whatever gets you through the night, it's all right. So I take it as a message from above, quotes, unquotes, right?
Do you look at your material that way when you get done recording it?
When I'm recording it, half the time I don't know what I'm saying, I'm really so busy doing it. And it's only when I come out of it and look at it and I see where I'm at the time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think I could do it and look at it at the same time.
What about...
Sometimes it means things that I didn't even know it meant.
Yeah, which brings up another point.
Can we make this the last one? Because I'm getting the cutthroat sign from Bob here.
Sure. A little bit about your appeal.
Oh yeah. Well, you gonna ask me something, or you want me to say something?
Well, I want you to... Is there anything that anybody who wants you to stay in the country can do?
Yes, they can, actually. If they write letters to the congressmen or senators or whatever it is, it shows that there is a sort of interest from the public in having me stay here. Although some of them might think, oh, well, one letter's not going to make any difference. But congressmen are like advertisers on radio and TV. One letter represents 20 or 30.
Yeah.
You know, so if 5 people write a letter, they reckon, well, that's 500 people writing. And it really does help, because if they, whoever they are, think that I don't have any support, well, then they can really come down on me.
Okay, can I ask you one more quick one?
Yeah.
A year ago at this time, I interviewed Yoko on the phone. And I'd like to ask you, what is the status between you and Yoko? If you think it's too personal, don't answer it. But I get the feeling from your album that you are kind of still there spiritually.
Yeah.
And that possibly, even though you are separated at this point, that's where your head is at.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head, and it is a bit sort of weird to talk about it. I have a glib answer, which is we're just good friends, you know, which we are, and probably always will be, as you can tell from the album anyway.
Yeah.
And I can't really talk about it, you know, because it makes me sort of feel weird.
Yeah.
But we feel the same towards each other. It's just that, you know, it seems that love has its changes to go through, and we're going through it, and probably lots of people have been through it, and it's just one of the stages of the game, I think.
Yeah.
And we're handling it in the best way we know how, which is in public, you know.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your calling. It
was a pleasure.
It's been nice talking to you.
It was a pleasure, and thanks for the interesting questions, you know.
Oh, that's all right. That's what
It makes me think when you ask me something, you know, that I have to think about. It's a change from just saying, hi, buy my album, you know.
Yeah. Well...
Oh, by the way, you can buy it.
Well, don't worry, we'll be playing plenty of your album.
Oh, that's very nice of you.
Okay, thanks a lot, John.
All right, bye-bye, John.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
That was John Lennon in New York City this afternoon around 12:30, and ZMF's John Houghton in Menomonee Falls having a conversation. And I thought it would be nice to play something from that album that they were talking about, the first solo album, and then something from his most recent